Welcome to the Man Up, Man Down podcast, presented by Volker Beluda and David Pawsey. We discuss the pressures and challenges faced by men approaching middle age that we're often too embarrassed to speak about with our friends. You can find us online at www.manupdown.com. Enjoy the show and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review.
Welcome to another episode of Man Up, Man Down. Very excited. I was just saying that before we went live about this episode. Because we're going to talk testosterone again, but we're talking real life testosterone. Anyway, let me introduce you to Dr. Ed Rainbow first. So he was leading the right life. He was a partner in a GP practice, a successful GP practice. He had his house, his car, wonderful wife, two incredible daughters, nice holidays. And then in 2019, he burned out. So by 2021, he was then the happiest he has ever been, and he didn't take any medications. So we wanted to speak with Ed about his journey and about access to mental health, but also learning about himself and his journey in general, and discuss testosterone. So we actually did a test, David and I, and we sent the test results to Ed, and that's why I was so excited. So Ed, first of all, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure. Real pleasure. Thank you for the enthusiastic welcome as well.
So, do you want to give us a bit of background? What you do, your journey from burnout to testosterone? I don't know if that's a journey, but yeah.
Yeah, no. There's a slightly serendipitous sort of journey. Yeah, the basic thing was you go to, when I was in my mid-20s, I decided to become a doctor. So there's a very clear career path. You go to medical school, you do the junior doctor training. You select some specialism or generalism. So general practice was the one that most suited me. But then I, after being a GP for 5 years or so, I became very ill. I became very depressed, very burnt out. I took probably about 6 months off working to sort of recover. And one of the unfortunate realizations, although I now kind of realize it as a blessing, but was essentially that I was unable to do the job. The job made me ill, basically, and I tried various approaches to adjusting how I did it to make it more sustainable, more fulfilling. But basically, I'd end up in the same point. Tried different surgeries, different locations, all sorts of variables. I just ended up in the same point, which was basically doing it in any sustained way. I just felt kind of exhausted and drained, and would recurrently become either very anxious or very depressed. So it came to the realization I just had to step away from it, basically. Which is rather challenging because, and I think quite a lot of men have this issue, that you enter into a career perhaps not necessarily kind of thinking how it's going to sort of pan out, but you maybe have certain motivations, and then you maybe reach a point which is pretty similar. I think quite a lot of men go this sort of stereotypical sort of midlife crisis, how it plays out. But I had this sort of rather difficult situation of a well-paying job, professional status, young family, and but not being able to do the job anymore. And how do you square all of that? So one of the I started experimenting with trying to find new ways of working. So I got into what's known as lifestyle medicine, which is essentially how do you improve people's health through kind of obvious stuff, really, but having a healthy diet, eating whole foods, exercising regularly, getting enough sleep, getting into the detail of all of that, and And that I did practice that a bit as a GP, and that did seem to work for some people. And I had some sort of good experiences there. And but I still basically did all this on myself, and I was like, okay, well maybe I can help men with all of this, and that was a sort of starting to move into mental health, I guess, and as a kind of more serious kind of specialization, let's say. And then sort of alongside that, just more or less by chance, someone asked me to do a talk about the male menopause, they called it. And it's about 3 years ago. And I remember thinking, oh, that's what are you talking about? Men don't have a menopause. That's women. That sounds like a load of nonsense to me. I've never heard such nonsense. And so I sort of was like, well, okay, I'll go and read about this. And I, in my head initially, I was like, I'm just going to write a talk about how there's no such thing as the male menopause. And and then I started to read about it and all the science and all the various studies and a few textbooks and things. And then and I found out it's not called the male menopause, but it's sort of andropause or testosterone deficiency is sort of better language or more objective language. And actually I started to feel quite guilty because I recalled men in my GP practice, and this is not that many of them, but this is a relatively typical story. So someone who I'll call him Clive, but sort of Clive's about 50, 55. He turns up at the GP and he says, basically, I'm not feeling great, and can I have some Viagra? And you sort of ask him why. He said, well, I can't really get an erection anymore. I can't have sex with my wife. And maybe you ask him a few more things. He says, I've put on some weight and I'm feeling a bit depressed or whatever. And you give him, and normally you give them the Viagra. Maybe you say, maybe you should try an antidepressant as well. Try and lose some weight. And then a fair amount of, so one of two things would happen. One would be you never see them again. Or two is they'd come back and say, well, this Viagra hasn't worked. And you wouldn't be able to work out why. And I kind of realized subsequently that I was basically, we never checked a testosterone level at anyone. And then there's reasons for that. I can go into why, but it wasn't standard practice. And that's probably the most obvious explanation. Basically, if you have that particular issue, if you have sexual problems as a man, particularly into middle age or later middle age, so that sort of led me, I guess, partly out of feeling a bit guilty, but partly out of the new knowledge, into working privately. Basically, I approached private companies to see if they had space, I guess, and one of them took me on, and so I work for two companies. One's called the Centre for Men's Health, and one's called Marion Clinic. But basically, they would say, well, we've got men coming forward who have low testosterone and mental health problems, and maybe you'd be a good fit. So I was sort of fortunate enough to end up with working in this field, basically, of testosterone and the sort of a mental health sort of overlap. Basically, is where I've got to on that front, and sort of again overlapping with lifestyle, what you can do to help kind of boost your testosterone naturally, that sort of thing. So that's the potted history. Slightly kind of unusual, but basically it's a hidden issue. I think the testosterone thing.
Just before we sort of properly dive into the testosterone, I mean, you sort of mentioned about getting to a stage in your career, and you sort of said a lot of men get to that stage, and obviously there's still a stigma around mental health. I mean, sort of as a GP, as someone that's dealing with people that are coming to you sort of day after day with mental health
Yeah.
issues, how sort of supportive were your colleagues, and the sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the how accepting
Yes, yeah, yeah.
was your industry about your mental health issues?
That's a good question, because I know certain industries are they treat people appallingly, really, don't they? So I was fortunate in various regards. So one was I was a partner in the practice, so my fellow partners were very supportive and just said, look, take the time off that you need to take off. And we'll, in the short term, we'll get cover, and we'll to do your work, and then we'll work out what needs to be worked out as you go along. So that was very helpful. So and then another element that was very helpful was the NHS has a health service for healthcare practitioners, basically. So doctors are notoriously, how do we say, difficult to engage in their own health and well-being, and particularly around this kind of stuff. So I mean, I didn't have these specific things, but doctors are more likely to get things like addictions to various drugs, because you can access them easier than other people, right? More likely to have try and hide complaints and things like that. So there's a real fear around losing a license to practice, essentially. So you have this sort of magic ticket that means you can work, and if which can be removed from you at any point, essentially, either GMC. I mean, within certain rules, but if there's a great deal of fear around losing your license to practice, essentially. Anyway, so there's this service exists that allows doctors to access it without them sort of feeding back into the sort of fitness to practice type stuff. So so I accessed that service, and I a really, really nice GP who worked for it, and they basically listened to me. And then I remember this very clearly. We sort of met in this slightly anonymous hotel. It was a sort of again, to keep it sort of anonymous, really. But they said what did they say? They said you're burnt out, severely depressed, and severely anxious, so you need to stop working. And I'm sort of laughing now. So it's not funny at all. But I remember this really weird, you're talking about someone else kind of thing. Like that isn't me. That's because I don't get ill, and doctors don't get ill or whatever, that kind of stuff. And it took quite a while to accept that. I'd been off work probably a month or so before I'd even seen him. So it's still very unreal. So so I guess to sort of get back to your question, so short term, very supportive. The doctor was always very supportive, and I wasn't very keen on taking antidepressants, so they were supportive of that, and we kind of decided to adopt this sort of lifestyle approach instead. I guess the longer run thing is, and then I guess everything's that couldn't carry on forever, essentially. So my colleagues were supportive of the return to work in a sort of staggered way, and it worked for a few months, and then just the same thing happened again. And I hadn't, partly just the job, and partly I hadn't learned how to manage myself particularly, or that kind of stuff. And ultimately, I guess I could have gone off work for another several months or whatever, but yeah, you realised I had to sort of bite the bullet and leave, really. So I was never pressured to leave. But I'm aware. But also, my partnership agreement, I think, had a sort of year limit on it. If you were off work for a year, you had essentially you were obliged to leave the partnership at that point. So there's So there was sympathy, there was kindness, there was some legal backup in all of that. So I felt quite well. Is I mean from your experience speaking to, because obviously it's presumably it's a fairly common topic that comes up on this podcast, I imagine. I mean, what do you find people experience?
I mean, it's I don't know. It's a funny one. It's almost depending on. It's not even industry specific, and it's almost like it almost feels the higher up someone is, the less support they have, because it's almost they're so focused on providing the support for their teams and their employees. It's, but I mean, and sort of, I mean, we've got an interview booked in very recently, which, I mean, it touches more on bullying in the workplace.
Okay.
But I think the fact is, and I guess the reason I asked is because, it is almost that. Well, as I say, it's almost like the leaders are kind of like, well, I can't show weakness because I've got to be strong for my team.
Yes.
And sort of, as a GP, it's almost like, well, I'm the one that's meant to be, almost like, well, I must be a failure if I can't help myself. I'm not saying that's how you would have felt.
No,
but
that's exactly correct. I mean, there's I would say a high degree of perfectionism within, and so I guess this is one of the things I discovered afterwards. Perfectionism, or I guess maybe you could call it attention to detail, which is probably a good thing as a doctor, but that to an nth degree, plus high empathy levels isn't a very good combination, essentially. So
and I think obviously just having as a patient, you see how little time a GP has with each person.
Yes.
And you can often sort of see in their face, and I think it's, without wanting to be disingenuous, it's usually the younger student doctors that you can kind of see. In some ways, it's almost like you can tell by that look on the face whether they're going to stay in the industry or not. And well, I don't know, but
no.
I
was literally I was doing I was asked to speak at an event, sort of end of GP training event, this week, here in Leicestershire, and that right at the very end, I was talking about all this stuff, and right at the very end, there was this little bit of whispering at the back. I was like, "Oh, what's this whisper?" And they were like, someone was like, "It just seems like if you work as a GP, you're going to get burnt out." And I was like, "Yeah, I think that's probably true now. I think the job is so difficult, complex, so little time. And also the people who are recruited into medical school now. So medical school is 60-40 female-male split now. And like particularly Leicester Medical School recruits people with sort of higher empathy levels, because we know that one of basically always the biggest complaint about doctors is not knowledge; it's how you communicate with people. Nearly every complaint boils down to how someone's been communicated with, and so the sort of address it's been addressed is getting people who are going to be better at that. But there's the flip side is actually, can you do the job? Are you sort of built in a way that enables you to do it? And maybe no one could do a job. I don't know. But so there's always conflicts sort of going on. And there's a lot of very capable GPs dropping out, essentially. Even when I was training, there was a report, the summary point was 40 under 40, so 40% of female GPs had dropped out by the age of 40, basically. Typically married to another doctor, have kids, take time out, and then kind of go, actually, I can't get back into this again. It's too much. And so so it's so there's a lot of this stuff going on, and general practice has rather a lot of difficulties. I would say. But it's always been like that, I think. It's always been in a bit of a state of crisis, and so a colleague used to say to me, anyway.
So something you said early on, you said GPs, and if you weren't necessarily, if I hope I interpreted that correctly, you weren't necessarily aware of mental health as a GP.
No, so quite the opposite. No, so and I guess this is what sort of drove me towards men and mental health. So about a sixth, I would say, of the consultations were mental health issues, maybe more.
Right.
Depending on the research you look at, about half, maybe even more of consultations don't fit into nice diagnostic boxes. Maybe so. Some research even says like 80% or whatever.
Yeah.
We kind of a lot of people think of going to the doctor as I have the specific problem and I need the tablet that fixes the problem.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff is actually driven by poverty or by ill health, so just constant stress from work, from not getting enough sleep, from not having much, enough nutrition or all this kind of stuff. And your body tells you in various ways. So anyway, so that's sort of the drive. See, a huge amount of the reflection I had after I had become unwell and started to get better was, and then I started to work again. I was like, nearly all of the mental health conversations are with women or children, basically, or teenagers. Very few with men, very, very few. And I realized, and then I started to learn about men and mental health, and basically, how do we say? There's a huge number of things that stop men from getting help, essentially. Which I guess you could loosely call sort of stigma or societal conditioning or whatever. So these are things around, they like I'm not asking for directions kind of thing. Like you should be able to solve your own issues and be physically strong and healthy and all this kind of stuff, right? And so if you're deviating from that, you're deviating from the script of being masculine, I suppose. And then there's the other thing, which is the solutions on offer. So I call this the DTs. So doctors, diagnosis, tablets, time off, talking therapy.
Right.
They can all be off-putting. So you don't want to. If you're sort of if in your head a man is healthy and fit and looks after himself, why would you go and see someone who tells you that you're not well? Essentially, there's a bizarre kind of paradox there.
Yeah.
Or similarly, the sort of time off work is deeply threatening for men because it shows that you're not able to work, you're not able to perform, and that again cuts against the sort of the masculine norms, and same talking therapy. What there's a what's a stereotypical phrase? What good would talking do? So if you're used to keeping everything here and never learnt how to express yourself in whatever way, shape, or form, then it's going to be completely alien, isn't it? And so that can be threatening rather than how do we say, kind of liberating. So, there's lots of issues. That's good. Yes, good, great question. Okay.
Yeah. And how does it all link now to testosterone? Because I'm
Yes.
very keen on looking at my
Yeah,
result.
we'll come to your result. This is the key bit of it. But what's interesting, the testosterone bit. So again, this is all new stuff that I've learned. So number one is it's not really in the medical curriculum. It's not really in GP training. And this is why I didn't really know anything about it. And I don't think doctors feel very confident about it at all. But what is interesting, so there's one study, I suppose this probably helps to illustrate this point. So there tend to be, with testosterone deficiency, 3 groups of symptoms. And probably the easiest way of saying this is there's a physical group, a mental group, and a sexual group, essentially.
Good.
And one study they looked at what levels of testosterone on average correlated with what symptoms. And the lowest level, so a level of 8 nanomoles per litre, and we'll go and look at your results in a bit, but 8 nanomoles that was associated with sexual problems, essentially. So men not being able to get erections or lacking any sex drive, things like that. And then a level of 10, I think, was more associated with sort of mental issues. So this is feeling a bit depressed or anxious, can't concentrate properly. And then a level of 12 was associated with physical things. So losing muscle mass, losing height. Kind of their bones kind of become a bit thin, muscles waste, feeling tired all the time, can be slightly anemic. So all of this kind of stuff. So it sort of overlaps. Obviously, with any of those things, you start to feel a bit rubbish and a bit sort of lacking in self-confidence and self-belief and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, that's the sort of overlap. Is if you have lower levels of these things, you can be more prone to getting mental health problems or sexual problems. I guess the testosterone replacement, as a drug, so there's obviously trials done on giving men testosterone with these things. So it works best with sexual symptoms, essentially. So if you have sexual problems, increasing the levels by a few points often resolves those or improves them enough. But with regards to mental health, there's good evidence summary about depression. But depression is the main one that's been researched, but some modest improvement of depressive symptoms with testosterone replacement. So that's the sort of overlap with all of this, I guess. What should we do? How should we sort of delve in then? What would be a good way of doing it?
Hello folks, it's Volker here. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. As you know, I coach executives, whether that is for leadership skills or sales leadership skills or working as a therapist too. There are few ways I can help you to get unstuck, improve your work-life balance or become a better version of yourself. So you will be more productive and have more time for your family. Whatever it is, you can join my client list of people from General Electric, Pepsi, DHL, Boots, and many others. Book a free exploratory call via my website, www.obnat.us. That's obnat.us. Now back to the show.
You're the doctor.
I am a doctor. Well, listen,
See you now.
yeah. So we did.
No, he doesn't need to see that, Volker. Pull your trousers back up.
No, it's not that kind of broadcast. Man, that's good. But maybe you could get into OnlyFans or something. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the next step.
This doesn't pan out. Anyway, I'm not getting involved in that though. Right. So what we did. So I'll try just talk through what we did as a sort of.
I think
this is sort of what I'd advise men to do if they think they maybe have an issue with this stuff. So the first thing I did was I got you both to fill in a screening questionnaire, basically. So something called the Adam questionnaire, and you can find this online very easily. I've got a little on one of my web pages. So I think it's Stan Store Men's Mind GP. If you type that in, you can go and access this for free. I've made a copy of it on that little page. But essentially, there's 10 questions, and 2 of them are around sexual symptoms, and then the other 8 are around mental and physical symptoms. And what it suggests is if you tick one of the sexual symptoms, then you're fairly, it gives you what we call a positive result, i.e. you're at a higher probability of having low testosterone levels. So I'm just opening this up on my computer while we talk. So yeah, this one's blank. Never mind. I'm not sure what's going on there. Anyway, that's not worked. Anyway, but the to the other end is if you have 3 out of the 8 of the mental or physical symptoms, then you're more likely again to have lower levels of testosterone. Effectively, that's the sort of idea. Now, here we are. I found out now. So the sexual ones are over months or years, and you have to be over 40 for this to be a valid test. So younger men, less likely. But so reduced libido, reduced sex drive is one of the sexual ones, and less strong erections is one of the sexual ones. So that's those questions. And then the physical ones are around reduced energy, reduced strength, height loss, reduced enjoyment of life, sort of sadness, grumpiness, reduced sporting ability, falling asleep after dinner, and reduced work performance. So those are it's quite a nice sort of questionnaire. Now, when we were doing it, one of the thoughts was, you could tick quite a lot of those things because of life events. Essentially, things going on would make you feel rubbish, and that's quite normal, right? And so I guess the test is, if it's positive, it's quite good at sort of, you end up in a group where you're more likely to have an issue with testosterone, but it's not like 100% essentially. But if you're in the sort of negative group, i.e. no problems or very few, then you're very likely not to have an issue essentially. So where this is useful is deciding who should be blood tested and who shouldn't. Basically, that's where this is sort of useful, and because it's very quick and free, essentially, it's quite useful in clinics and things like that if you want to do that. So that's sort of where that's useful. But I thought I'd sort of bring that in. There's other ones available that are slightly longer, and if you go on various companies, obviously, encourage men to try and be funneled into their work on this. So, and they'll have a variation of this at the start. So that's that. Did that make sense? So explain that, you're kind of clear enough. Yeah. And then we had we did a small sort of testosterone panel, essentially. So a small collection of results. So what's useful to understand, I guess, is, so you get the one we did was very limited, but it's basically you get a total testosterone level, which is how much testosterone there is in your blood, essentially. And you also get something called free testosterone. I'll explain that in a second. And then you get a variety of other bits and bobs, something called follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, something called luteinizing hormone, LH, something called sex hormone binding globulin, something called prolactin, and something called estrogen. So how do you make sense of all of this? So the key thing to get your head around is men have men have a daily testosterone cycle, I guess. So about 6 a.m, we get a peak in testosterone levels, and it sort of goes up. It goes sort of like just before 6, and then it gradually kind of goes down during the day, and that's basically why you get morning erections. Is you have higher levels of testosterone. So it's just a natural thing to occur.
Working away there.
Yeah, it's good. That's good. Yeah, it's good. And that's quite a useful thing if people are how do we say, struggling with sometimes they sort of say, well, I don't have these erections in the morning at all, it's sort of men come, and that's usually a kind of useful little indicator of something's not right.
So just to ask,
Yes,
is
please.
that sort of based on
Let me just close.
a sort of traditional sort of working pattern. I mean, if you're
Yeah. So that's just not.
So make sure that everyone has a tea break at 6 o'clock in the morning if they've been working. So
I've got no idea. It's just what happens. It's just what happens. So we make it. So it's made in your testicles. So not a lot of men seem to know about this. Testosterone is made in your testicles, right? That's sort of a useful bit of information. And but it's not a sort of just automatic system. So your body has lots of balances essentially. So you have a sensory system in here called your pituitary gland, and that basically senses how much of your testosterone you have in your blood at any one point, and will at the lower points it will register as less, i.e. that sort of early hours of the morning, and it will send out two hormones, one which we had on those panels, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, and their job is to travel around the blood to the testicles to stimulate two types of cell that make testosterone and make sperm to become active. And so you have this sort of daily cycle where the testosterone goes up and down, and the stimulatory hormones go up and down as well. So this is this sort of constant balance and rebalance going on. So that's what those numbers are in your blood results. So yeah, that's some of it. Then there's other bits as well. So testosterone and estrogen are very similar chemical compounds. You just do something called aromatization. So you add a little bit to testosterone and it becomes estrogen. Men have tiny amounts of that. That's useful for bone strength, brain health, those things. So those are most of the bits in those tests. And then there's maybe two other bits worth mentioning. One called prolactin. That's basically, as you could probably work out, that's the hormone that makes women lactate. You produce milk after birth. So there's a rare type of brain tumor that can suppress testosterone levels, called a prolactinoma. So it's useful to know that that's normal. And then there's another thing called sex hormone binding globulin. I don't know if it's that. So basically, there's your about 97% of your testosterone is attached to another molecule in the bloodstream. So one is called albumin, it's also on those things, and one is called sex hormone binding globulin. And about 2%-ish is unattached. So that's the free testosterone that you get in there. And the sex hormone binding globulin is interesting. So it holds the testosterone very firmly. So essentially, it can just be stuck in the circulation and be unusable, essentially, too. And so some men have very high levels of sex hormone binding globulin, which is can be with age, genetics, those kind of things. So yeah, so that's the sort of rundown of the general points. Shall we talk through the individual results? Are you happy to do that? With that sort of what we'd like to do? I mean, I've already emailed these guys that if anyone was going to complain about the ethics of this. So we already sort of have an understanding about what's going on. It's not some sort of sort of dramatic reveal kind of thing of something terrible.
Jeremy Kyle style.
Yes. You are the father. Yeah. None of that. Right. So
David, you're my brother.
Yes, you're actually brothers. Congratulations. I knew it. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, just like twins, Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
It's exactly that's what's going on. That's what's going on, right?
That would be so funny. We should do a DNA test at some point, David. That's one for the map, you know.
Different tests, right? So I've just got David's ones open in front of me. So I mean, the summary point, just for anyone listening, is basically all normal, but I'll sort of talk. This is the sort of thing I talk through with patients. So, you have your overall testosterone level. What do they give you? 13.5. So that's nanomoles per. So basically, that's about average for How old are you, Dave? You're about 40 or something, I'm guessing.
I'm 47.
47, fine, perfect. So it's
Yeah.
about average for anyone sort of 35 plus.
That beats you by half a point, David.
Yes.
Yeah, you
So-
might have done yours earlier in the morning than me.
Yeah, you might
So,
have
you
got
know,
up-
my levels dropped off.
Yeah.
Clock, you know.
That's it. So that can make a big difference, though. You know, if you did it like 4 in the afternoon or after you'd been out drinking all night or something, you make a huge difference to the numbers, right? So this is where it's useful because with this stuff you kind of have to compare like with like. So if treating people or whatever, you want them to get the blood test at the same time in the same lab or whatever, that kind of thing. But yeah, so the testosterone level was normal essentially, and then you had normal levels of the two pre-hormones, the follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone 2.4 and 2.8. So that's encouraging in the sense that some men have with lower levels of testosterone, they how do you say, they have much higher levels or high levels of those two, because the body's trying to produce more testosterone. Essentially, it recognizes it needs more on some level through these feedback loops, and it's trying to do that basically. And so lower levels sort of indicate a healthy functioning system. Interestingly, very low levels can indicate a very disrupted system, which has big problems in it. But yeah, so that's all good news. But you had a prolactin level of 157. That's totally normal on the scale. You had sort of a normal level of sex hormone binding globulin, 25.6 nanomoles per liter. So you want some of it being carried by some of the testosterone being held, but not too much, and that's again quite a normal amount. Your free testosterone level was 0.29, which is again about in the middle, about average for your age. Same for the estrogen levels, 125. So I mean, look, if you brought as we sort of indicated with the screening test, and this is a fairly normal thing, and I guess we're operating a slightly abnormal way, because normally people who come to the clinic to see me have a big shopping list of problems generally that they're worried about. Some people are doing it as a health kind of check kind of thing, but broadly they have a lot of problems, and they turn up kind of wanting to explore those and explore low testosterone. So that's your stuff, David. Does that make sense? Any questions about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it sort of well, I mean, you know, is it? I guess the question is,
Yeah.
do I need to be doing anything with my diet or exercise, or am I all right?
Yeah. I guess there's two or three ways of looking at that, aren't there? So you could say, look, this is fine. Basically, this is not. If it said like 8 or something as a total testosterone, then I'd be a little bit kind of suspicious. But equally, it's about how you feel as an individual. So if you feel like essentially you don't have any symptoms that fit with low testosterone, then that's probably normal for you. Essentially, that's
Well, I mean, the thing is, it's like I'm often grumpy, I'm often tired, I can't be bothered to exercise. So, it's
personality. I mean, personality is personality, right? You can't that's not you if you've always been like that as a little kid, and then as a teenager or whatever. But I guess broad points around what helps increase testosterone levels in terms of what you can do. So one of the key exercise-wise is strength exercise. So building muscle naturally seems to help boost testosterone levels. That's it. Yeah, Volk's got the idea. Well, I don't think that counts, but yeah.
Yep. 3 times a week.
3 times a week. Yeah, great.
You do that 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive.
That's all I have time for.
Yeah. So that's one. So make sure you get enough sleep. So waking up feeling refreshed, is just generally a good indicator. having enough in terms of foods and making sure, as always, like whole foods, ideally organic foods, which I know can be a bit of a stretch, but the reason for that is things like pesticides and herbicides on food accumulate in our system and disrupt our endocrine, our hormone systems, basically. So you can over time sort of do yourself some damage through eating food like that, I guess. So I actually had one patient where he used to be a sort of crop sprayer. That was his job, and we were sort of
Right.
talking about and he'd sort of been intermittently depressed for 20 years, and it was only like 20, and the antidepressants under it. And his GP just tested the testosterone level, and it was very low. I was like, oh, well,
Wow.
maybe that's got to do with it. So, but that's that's maybe a slightly unusual case, but anyway, to do with omega fats within the foods, nuts, seeds, salmon, avocado, that kind of stuff. Good vitamin D levels are important, so getting sunshine when you can. It's a bit tricky in this country, but in the summer, as much as you can. Usually I get people to supplement, to be honest, with vitamin D supplements. And I guess the other one is, and this is quite a big one for men, I think, is learning to kind of relax and let go of stuff. So I don't know, we didn't really go into this, but there's this sort of long series of chemical pathways, but testosterone is created from cholesterol, basically. It goes down a series of about 5 changes. But if you kind of go down a slightly different path, the cholesterol becomes cortisol, one of our stress hormones. And so if we're stressed, we preferentially make the cortisol. So on a evolutionary level, basically, we're meant to exist, survive, reproduce. And the system makes sense in that context because it's much better to be running away from the lion than having sex and being eaten by the lion. So so what can happen is if a lot of guys don't know how to relax, don't know how to look after themselves. I think I used to be in that category. And so you're constantly stressed, you're constantly making stress hormones and you feel terrible. And then you will give yourself a relative kind of testosterone deficiency in effect by being stressed all the time. So that's things like learning things like breathing techniques, meditation, just learning to stop, learning to have boundaries around work, not doing work 14 hours a day or whatever, that kind of stuff. So that's all that. Does that sort of answer those bits?
Yeah.
Good enough. Yeah. And I was just trying to find Volker's results, and I managed to not find them. So here I've got an email where we were talking about it. So as you said, Volker, your testosterone level was slightly higher. 14, yes. and you had slightly lower levels of the sex hormone binding globulin, which means that you therefore have slightly higher levels you're slightly above the average for the free testosterone, basically. So there's this sort of upward sort of spiral. I mean, all these things are you well within what's just normal for most people, right? But your estrogen level is quite similar, essentially, so usually there's roughly a sort of 10-to-1 estrogen to testosterone level on these markers, and yours is about there. So interestingly, if you overtreat some men, if you sort of overtreat them a bit, they get estrogen symptoms. They start to put weight on the chest or have very sensitive nipples, or I can't remember what else. One guy started crying all the time. He was like things like this. He had to sort of adjust his treatment of it. Anyway, and your FSH and LH, so the pre-hormones again were about 3, I think, from memory. So again, quite normal levels. So both of you are sort of very very normal results, essentially.
So the follicle stimulating and the lutein.
Luteinizing, yeah.
They're around to 6 and
Oh,
7.
6 for
Yeah, so is that because you mentioned earlier the lower the better. So this is what I was
generally,
thinking. I had more than David.
maybe,
You know,
and this might be the time of day that you had it done.
right?
You know what I
Because it
mean?
was in the morning.
Yeah, and this, I guess, that indicates also the importance of the correct way round of viewing it is the symptoms first, and then
Right.
the blood tests, if that makes sense. Because
Right.
it's you can, depending on how you want to view it, you can overdiagnose people. So you could essentially just label everyone as having low testosterone on some level, and say you have some testosterone or whatever. But it has to the problem. There has to be a genuine problem, basically, for the individual for the treatment to then be effective. So and as you see, there's a broad range of what's normal in effect. So yeah, no, I all of you, I get what you're saying. But it's I guess normal in with a healthy normal person must be normal for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, also there's problems with doing one-off blood tests. They can, you have no trend to relate it to. So, again, you can. It can cause anxiety, I guess, is the sort of random testing essentially. So,
Right.
but yeah, any other thoughts, questions?
Super fascinating. I mean, so based on our results, we don't have to worry about anything.
No,
Basically, that's what you're
no,
saying.
basically, based on the sort of screening tests and the objective, the sort of what you sort of wrote about, the potential flaws and what's going on in
Yeah.
their lives, and then no, there would be no concern here. I mean, neither of you would go and consult someone because you don't perceive that you have an issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you said symptoms first, right?
yes,
So
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
you
So
don't want to work it backwards and say, oh, the test results are slightly off.
yes.
Folk will go and see a GP because you might be depressed, right? And go, but I'm feeling fine.
Yeah. So this is where sort of we think of medicine as a science, right? A sort of pure, but
Yeah.
human beings there's so many variables, and like you're saying, are we just picking up someone's personality on a test? Like you're saying, like is that's we're allowed to be grumpy if we're grumpy people. Yeah, that's okay, right? So yeah. So I guess, but having said that, so there's variation in what's normal. I suppose this is the thing. So the guidelines I go by are the British Society of Sexual Medicine ones. They suggest if you have some symptoms, in particular the sexual symptoms that we talked about, the not being able to get an erection or less strong erections, no morning erections or absent morning erections, things like that. Then, and you have a total level of under 12, you're very likely to have a sort of testosterone deficiency issue, and testosterone replacement is quite likely to work essentially in terms of getting you feeling better. So these are freely available, these guidelines and summary articles.
Right.
So that's a sort of fairly standard thing. And then there's a sort of, how do we say, what do you do if you're level 13 and you have these sort of symptoms, that kind of thing. And that's more of a kind of nuanced discussion about what's going on, how long's it been going on, what's normal for you, that kind of thing. But there is some expert sort of opinion that it may be that doing an experiment with that kind of person of treatment and saying, look, this may work, this may not work, and seeing how it pans out may be acceptable, depending on the individual and the clinician and where you are, basically. So there's a degree of leeway, I guess, and it's treating each person as an individual rather than just using a set of rules, basically.
Yeah. Brilliant. Highly fascinating. I'm looking a little bit at the time. We have to come to a close. I could carry on this conversation. I feel like I'm a little bit in the doctor's, in the GP practice, right? Like I have access to GP. I can ask all the questions because
You could ask all the
Yeah.
questions, every
Right.
single health question.
And we're not being ushered out after 10
That's
minutes.
exactly,
That's it.
you know.
Yeah, there is a special set of skills to get someone out of a room. I don't know if you that's probably one for another podcast. Anyway,
Yeah, I mean,
yes,
it's fascinating, right? I mean,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, first of all, thank you so much.
No worries. No worries.
Where, if people want to find out more, what they can do in terms of mental health, work with you. So work with clients privately, or
Yeah, so I do a sort of mixture of different things. I mean, the easiest way, if you have any questions, just email me ed@mensmindgp.com. That's the easiest way. Or if you go to my website, it's mensmindgp.com, and there's like a form you can fill in or whatever, and I'll get back to you. So that's easy enough. If you feel that you have low testosterone levels and you want an appointment to talk through that. So I work through two companies. One's called Centre for Men's Health. One's called Marion Gluck Clinic. They have physical and virtual appointments, and contact them and see if that is your fit. Essentially, what might work for you. If you're not sure, just email me and then I'll guide you really. So that's the sort of testosterone side of things. If you're feeling like you want a bit more, holistic mental health work overview, I have a sort of program called Mind Compass, essentially, and I basically got detailed questionnaires and work sort of acting as a sort of health coach, help you adjust what needs to be adjusted in your life to improve your mental health naturally, really. So that's another thing I offer. Yeah, those are the things. Again, email me or use the form on the website.
yeah, and we put that all in the show notes as well, so where people can reach out to you. So thank you very much for being our guest, and thanks for dissecting the testosterone test. So
That's all right. That's all right. I
great.
hope people found that useful, and thanks for having me on. Be a real pleasure.
Oh, it's been brilliant, fascinating stuff. Thanks, Ed.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Feel free to reach out to Volker or David via our website, www.manupdown.com, or podcast@manupdown.com, with any feedback or to let us know what topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Hear you again soon.